Welcome to the deep dive. We've been digging through this stack of material you sent over, lots of research, articles, notes, all sort of centering on this really huge fundamental topic, human unfairness.
It really is a paradox, isn't it? I mean, it's everywhere, seems to affect everyone, leads to these outcomes that just feel undeserved. And yeah, it feels like it's just baked into the human experience somehow.
Totally. And the sources that they really stress, it's not just some abstract philosophical debate.
No, it goes way deeper. Psychology, biology, even how our societies are put together.
Exactly. It's that feeling, right? Not just legal injustice, but that deep, sometimes painful sense that things are fundamentally wrong. The distribution of, well, everything. Wealth, opportunity, respect.
And the material makes it clear this isn't just perception. It has real, measurable effects.
Right. So, okay, our goal here in this deep dive is to take this ancient human problem and look at it through a modern lens, specifically an AI lens.
Yeah, can these new tools actually help us understand this enduring thing better? Or, maybe even offer new perspectives? One source even asks if it could, make life easier or improve our logic somehow.
That's the big question we're tackling today. We're going to try and navigate this very complex landscape of unfairness using the stuff you've shared.
Okay, let's dive in.
All right, so first things first, unpacking what we even mean by unfairness. The sources, they immediately push back on the simple idea that it's just the absence of justice.
Right, it's not just a gap or a void. Some of the philosophical views in there argue that unfairness or injustice is its own thing, a primary quality.
Like Judith Shklar's idea.
Exactly. She and others suggest it's a distinct human experience, not just the lack of its opposite.
And what really struck me was the idea that the feeling of injustice, that sense of being wronged, that might be a way stronger motivator for us than some abstract idea of justice.
That point really jumps out, doesn't it? It seems humans are much more immediately driven to fix a perceived wrong than to, strive for some perfect theoretical justice.
Yeah, the anger or pain of it is a real catalyst.
Absolutely. And if AI is ever going to genuinely interact with humans or model our behavior, it has to get that. Yeah. It needs to prioritize understanding that lived experience of perceived injustice, not just, abstract fairness principles.
It's where maybe passive acceptance flips into wanting change. But our whole understanding of justice itself has changed so much over time.
Oh, completely. The sources track this, from ancient concepts, Plato, Aristotle, where justice was more about everyone knowing and accepting their allotted place, keeping the social order stable.
Which sounds incredibly unfair to us now.
Totally. It's a fundamentally different framework. And then you contrast that with, say, modern egalitarian views like John Rawls.
Justice is fairness, the veil of ignorance thought experiment.
Right. If you didn't know who you'd be born as, rich, poor, whatever, what kind of society would you design? Rawls says you'd go for maximum basic freedoms and only allow inequalities if they somehow help the worst off.
That's worlds away from those ancient hierarchies.
And also quite different from, say, libertarian perspectives like Robert Nozick's, which really emphasize individual rights and minimal government.
And the underlying point in the material seems to be how people perceive the fairness of treatment isn't just a nice to have. It's actually crucial for keeping society stable.
Yeah, if enough people feel things are fundamentally unfair, that's fertile ground for instability and unrest. Unequal treatment is a direct threat.
Okay, so moving from philosophy to how this actually shows up in social structures and even mathematical patterns.
Yeah, this is where the sources really get into the systemic side of it. Unfairness shows up as structured social inequality. It's built into hierarchies, class, race, gender.
It's not random bad luck.
No, it leads to these really unequal distributions of, everything goods, wealth, opportunities.
And sociology gives us a couple of main ways to think about why this inequality exists, right?
There's the functionalist view, which argues inequality might be inevitable, maybe even necessary, to motivate the most capable people to take on important jobs. It's a controversial take, but it's one perspective.
And the other one is conflict theory. Sees it less as functional and more deliberate.
More about power dynamics. Conflict theory sees inequality as a result of imbalances, where dominant groups use their power and ideology, what Gramsci called cultural hegemony, to basically maintain control and keep resources flowing their way. They see it hindering progress.
The sources bring in some big thinkers here. Marx obviously focusing on class struggle.
Yeah, Marx saw capitalism as inherently unfair through exploitation, things like surplus value from labor, and the alienation workers feel. He saw the division of labor itself as a tool for concentrating wealth.
But Durkheim viewed the division of labor differently, more positively.
He did, initially. Saw it fostering social connection, interdependence. But even Durkheim saw potential problems like anomie, that feeling of normlessness in changing societies, or a forced division of labor where people are pushed into roles unfairly.
And Weber brought in bureaucracy.
Right. Weber recognized bureaucracy's efficiency, its rules, its hierarchy. But he also warned it could become an iron cage, dehumanizing people and perpetuating unfairness just through rigid, impersonal processes.
It's striking how these different views all point to unfairness being actively produced by how we organize society. It's not just accidental.
And the historical examples provided are pretty stark.
Yeah, things like slavery, serfdom,
Yeah.
systems based on outright theft of labor.
Or rigid caste systems, India, apartheid South Africa, where discrimination was literally written into law.
Gender inequality, patriarchy. The sources suggest that really solidified with agriculture and owning land.
Seems so. As physical labor got more tied to accumulating wealth, women were often pushed into less valued domestic roles. Though, interestingly, the material notes some ancient societies were actually more equitable than later ones, shows patriarchy isn't some fixed natural state.
Then there's ageism shifting from respecting elders to seeing age as a burden, and child labor during the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah, these aren't just isolated misfortunes. They're presented as systematic outcomes of economic systems and power structures, often explicitly designed to create and maintain inequality. Unfairness is this ongoing adaptive process tied to power.
So if AI is going to understand this, it needs to grasp not just individual acts of bias, but the whole historical and structural context, the architecture of inequality.
Exactly, and it needs to understand that even the definition of what's considered fair changes over time and across cultures.
Okay, let's shift from structures to numbers. How do you actually measure inequality? The sources bring in math.
Yeah, this is interesting. The Gini coefficient is the standard one in economics, usually for income or wealth.
Gives you that number between 0 and 1, right? 0 is perfect equality, 1 is one person has everything.
Precisely. The sources use that simple table example. 0 means everyone has the same slice. Maybe 0.3 or 0.4 shows moderate inequality. And 1 is total concentration. It comes from the Lorenz curve, visually.
And there was another one mentioned, the Kolkata Index.
Yeah, another mathematical tool to measure distribution. These things let us put a number on inequality, compare it across places or over time.
Then things got really wild with the physics perspective, the constructal law.
Right. This is a theory from physics, Adrian Bijan's work, suggesting that systems that evolve for efficient flow, like river basins moving water, or maybe economies moving goods and wealth, might naturally tend towards some degree of unequal distribution.
So, it's suggesting that inequality isn't entirely man-made, that some baseline level might just happen in complex flow systems.
That's the provocative idea presented. A potential underlying physical tendency linked to how systems evolve for efficiency and complexity.
Okay, but here's the critical tension the sources really drive home, and it feels important.
Go on.
While physics might suggest a tendency towards some unequal distribution, human societies clearly don't just let that happen passively. We actively institutionalize it. We amplify it into specific, morally loaded, often horrific forms of unfairness.
That distinction is absolutely crucial. The constructal law might describe a tendency in flow systems, but it doesn't explain or justify human-made systems like slavery or caste systems or systemic racism designed for exploitation.
So the unfairness we experience and care about is described as the socially constructed amplification, taking any baseline tendency and massively magnifying it through power structures, laws, beliefs.
Exactly. It separates a potential physical observation about distribution from the moral and social reality of human-created injustice.
Which means AI could potentially analyze those underlying distribution patterns and help us identify where human systems are deliberately pushing things way beyond that baseline into what we'd call unfairness.
It could maybe help distinguish between, statistical variation and actual rectifiable injustice baked into how we've designed things.
Okay, let's talk about the impact, the weight of all this. Because unfairness isn't just out there, it gets inside us. Our minds, our bodies.
Oh, the psychological toll is huge. Perceiving unfairness, especially chronically, leads to feelings like powerlessness, anger, even guilt sometimes.
Yeah.
And the sources link it directly to worse physical health over time.
It's a major mediator between discrimination and things like depression, PTSD.
Definitely. And the emotional responses aren't always straightforward, are they?
Yeah.
The sources mention reacting to overwhelming injustice with things like laughter or crying. almost paradoxical reactions.
Yeah, what was that about?
It suggests maybe a deeper, more involuntary processing kicks in when our rational minds just can't cope with the sheer absurdity or cruelty of it, like an eruptive expression when that balance between yourself and the unfair world feels broken.
So AI trying to grasp human emotion needs to account for that complexity, those seemingly contradictory responses to deep pain.
Absolutely. And of course, our own minds aren't objective observers here. Cognitive biases shape how we see fairness.
Right, like confirmation bias, looking for stuff that confirms what we already believe,
Right.
or the just world hypothesis.
The tendency to want to believe people get what they deserve, which unfortunately can lead to victim blaming because it's uncomfortable to think the world isn't fair.
And our own worldviews, how we were raised, maybe really influence our reactions.
For sure. Someone who deeply believes in pure meritocracy might be absolutely shattered by discrimination, maybe internalize it as personal failure. Someone else might see the same event and react with anger directed at the system.
And the psychological impact feeds into mental health issues and sometimes addiction, too.
Yeah, the sources connect stigma and discrimination directly. They worsen symptoms, make people less likely to seek help, and can create this awful cycle. Behavior sometimes linked to addiction, like lying or stealing, can stem from the desperation caused by unfair systems or stigma, which then reinforces the stigma.
Making it incredibly hard to get back on track. The sources say it's hard to come back to the same state of mind.
It's a powerful self-reinforcing loop. Perceived unfairness, distress, maybe coping mechanisms that are harmful, leading to more stigma. AI aiming to help needs to see that whole cycle.
And adolescents seem particularly vulnerable here.
Yes, discrimination based on anything looks, identity, race, hits hard during those formative years. The sources link it clearly to lower self-esteem, worse mental well-being, and more risky behaviors.
The material also briefly mentioned greed and deception as triggers.
Yeah, if you perceive someone else acting purely out of greed, their success feels immediately unfair. And just feeling deceived, like trust was broken for someone else's gain, that's a really basic, powerful trigger for feeling injustice.
So it's deeply personal, psychological, but then it gets even deeper. It's actually biological.
This is maybe one of the most staggering insights in the material. Chronic discrimination acts as a serious psychosocial stressor. And that stress isn't just mental, it has direct physical consequences.
Like heart disease, diabetes, hypertension.
Exactly. And there's a concept of weathering.
Accelerated aging, right.
Basically, yeah. The idea that the constant stress from living under unfair conditions like systemic racism or deep poverty puts cumulative wear and tear on the body. It leads to worse health outcomes and literally speeds up biological aging in oppressed groups.
And it's not just stress hormones. It can actually change how our genes work.
That's the epigenetic embodiment of inequality. Stressors like discrimination can cause chemical tags to be added or removed from our DNA, things like DNA methylation. These tags don't change the underlying DNA sequence, the code itself.
But they change how the genes are read, how they're expressed.
Exactly. So unfairness literally gets under the skin and alters our biology.
Wow.
And here's the really sobering part. These epigenetic changes caused by social injustice might even be transmissible across generations.
Wait, so the unfairness your parents or grandparents faced could biologically affect you even before you were born?
That's what the research is suggesting. Systemic unfairness isn't just a social construct. It becomes embedded biologically with effects that can ripple down through families. That table in the source material lays it out. Stressors, biological mechanisms, epigenetics, inflammation, health outcomes, potential intergenerational transmission.
That makes unfairness feel incredibly persistent and hard to escape. If AI were used in healthcare, say, understanding this biological layer seems critical.
It could potentially identify hidden vulnerabilities linked to historical or social factors, adding a whole new dimension to risk assessment and intervention.
Okay, beyond the individual, unfairness obviously shapes our relationships, our families.
Definitely. Think about gender inequality within households. Who does the unpaid labor? Who controls the money? The power imbalances that can, tragically, contribute to gender-based violence. The sources noted even just becoming parents can amplify perceived unfairness in dividing chores and care.
And kids see this. They grow up watching these dynamics.
And they learn from them, potentially perpetuating the same patterns. But it's not just social learning. It's also systemic disadvantage, like poverty, limiting opportunities generation after generation, and as we just discussed, maybe even biological transmission. Unfairness creates these feedback loops.
Poverty itself is presented not just as lack of money, but systemic lack of access.
Right. Access to basic needs. Food, healthcare, safe housing. Food insecurity, for example, isn't just about individual budgeting. It's tied to income levels, food deserts, systemic issues, and social exclusion often locks people into poverty.
And that idea of the criminalization of poverty, punishing people for being poor or homeless.
Yeah, that just further marginalizes people, makes it even harder to escape.
And finally, the link between overall economic disparity in a society, that Gini coefficient again, and general well-being.
Yes, studies consistently show that societies with higher inequality tend to have lower average life satisfaction, poorer population health outcomes, and less social trust.
And that's not just because poor individuals are worse off.
It's partly that, but also broader societal effects. Things like underinvestment in public services that benefit everyone, and psychosocial stress from status anxiety, the constant pressure and comparison in a very unequal society.
Okay, so summing up this part. Unfairness is this incredibly complex, layered thing. Philosophical roots, sociological structures, measurable patterns, maybe even physical tendencies, deeply psychological and biological impacts, shaping families, societies, passed down generationally. It's not random, it's often systematically produced and amplified.
It's a heavy picture. But the sources don't stop there. They also talk about human resistance.
Right, that powerful sense of injustice we started with. It's a huge motivator.
Absolutely. The point made is that people might endure unfairness if it feels inevitable, like there's no choice. But when a shared feeling arises that the injustice is wrong, and crucially that it can be changed, that's when movements happen.
History's full of examples. Women's suffrage, the civil rights movement in the U.S., the anti-apartheid struggle, LGBTQ+ rights.
All driven by people collectively deciding that the status quo was unacceptable and that change was possible. It shows that capacity for collective action, for moral progress, even against huge odds.
That perception that change is possible seems key.
It really does.
Which brings us back, finally, to the AI lens. Given all this, the deep roots, the systems, the impacts, can AI actually help in this ongoing human fight against unfairness?
This is where the potential, as highlighted in the sources, gets really interesting. AI could significantly boost our ability to understand and even detect unfairness.
How so?
Well, AI can process vast amounts of data in ways humans just can't. It can potentially uncover hidden patterns, biases, and systems that we might miss.
Like finding bias in mortgage lending algorithms or hiring processes.
Exactly. AI can be like a magnifying glass for systemic biases that might otherwise be invisible or hidden by our own cognitive limitations or just the sheer scale of the data.
Although the sources also called it a double-edged mirror.
A very good description. Because if that AI is trained on data that reflects our existing human biases, historical inequalities, racist or sexist language, whatever it won't just mirror those biases. It can amplify them.
We've seen examples, right? Biased facial recognition, struggling with darker skin tones, discriminatory risk scores in the justice system.
Those are real dangers. So AI isn't neutral. It learns what we feed it, biases and all, but it can also be a tool to expose those very biases.
So the challenge is using it deliberately to diagnose the unfairness embedded in our systems.
Precisely. Not just trying to avoid bias in AI, but using AI to find the often subtle, systemic unfairness in our existing processes and data.
Okay, so beyond just understanding, can AI actually help make things fairer, improve life, promote equity?
The sources suggest several possibilities. Resource allocation is a big one. Using AI may be combined with game theory to design fairer ways to distribute things like healthcare resources, humanitarian aid, maybe even manage shared environmental resources.
What about mental health support? You mentioned the psychological toll.
Right. AI could make support more accessible. Personalized chatbots available 24/7, tools to help people track moods or practice coping strategies, potentially bridging gaps where human therapists are scarce or stigmatized.
Could it help build community resilience?
Potentially, yeah. By analyzing data to maybe predict where social stresses are highest, helping coordinate responses during crises, or ensuring essential services actually reach underserved areas more effectively.
And then there's promoting DEI in workplaces, using data for better policymaking, analyzing criminal justice data for disparities, developing accessibility tech.
Yeah, the list goes on. Across many fields, the potential is there for AI to help operationalize justice, basically. Turn abstract fairness ideals into concrete improvements in how systems work. Maybe even optimize things to reduce unfairness, leading towards a state where people might, as one source put it, feel good all the time, not because life is perfect, but because some systemic barriers are lower.
But, and it's a big but, this potential comes with serious hurdles. That risk of AI just repeating biases from its training data.
It's a #1 concern mentioned. If the data reflects decades or centuries of inequality, the AI learns that inequality, garbage in, garbage out, or maybe bias in, amplified bias out.
And the digital divide.
Yeah, huge issue. Unequal access to the technology itself, computers, reliable internet, and maybe even more importantly, the skills and training needed to actually use these advanced AI tools effectively.
So if only privileged groups can access or use AI tools designed to promote fairness,
Then AI could actually end up widening existing gaps, creating new forms of unfairness around who benefits from this technology.
that's why the mitigation strategies are so crucial.
Absolutely. Things like making sure the data used to train AI is as diverse and representative as possible, having diverse teams building these systems, putting strong regulations and oversight in place.
And always keeping a human in the loop.
This is non-negotiable, really, both ethically and practically. AI learns patterns, including biased ones. It doesn't understand human values like fairness or justice or compassion in a human way. It can't achieve fairness on its own.
So it needs constant human guidance.
Continuous guidance. Diverse human perspectives involved in designing it, testing it, evaluating its outputs. And ultimately, humans have to remain accountable for the decisions made using AI tools.
So this AI understanding of human unfairness isn't about AI figuring it out solo. It's more like a partnership.
Exactly. It's a co-created understanding. Humans use AI's analytical power, its ability to see patterns in complexity, but we provide the essential ethical compass, the contextual understanding, the moral judgment that AI lacks.
The responsibility for actually creating a fairer world stays with us. AI is a tool.
A potentially very powerful tool, but still a tool in human hands.
Wow. Okay, we have covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
Okay.
From, defining unfairness beyond just the lack of justice, through the sociology and math and even physics showing its systemic nature.
To its incredibly deep impacts, psychological, biological, relational, societal, even intergenerational, seeing how it's not just random, but often systematically produced and amplified.
Yeah, but also seeing that powerful human drive to resist, that sense that injustice can be fought, that change is possible.
That capacity for resistance is key.
And AI, as the sources suggest, could be a new kind of partner in that ongoing human effort, a tool to help us see unfairness more clearly, maybe design more equitable systems, offer support.
But a tool that absolutely requires careful, ethical, human steering. It won't fix things by itself.
And the sources end with that really stark, almost brutal reflection, don't they? Contrasting all this effort to understand with the simple, harsh reality of cruelty.
Yeah, life is all there is and what it is, and when a human dies, it needs no human and AI understanding of human unfairness. Cruel people are killing other people every day. They don't care about human and AI understanding of human unfairness to save lives. Why do they do that?
That question just hangs there, doesn't it?
It really does. It's a powerful reminder of the scale of the challenge. Even with deeper understanding, even with amazing new tools like AI, the existence of deliberate cruelty points to something fundamental about human complexity, maybe human nature itself.
It underlines that the human project, striving for a fairer, less cruel world, is far from over. And maybe, just maybe, using tools like AI wisely, ethically, helps us navigate those deep complexities a little better than before.
A potential partner, helping us understand ourselves better, hopefully helping us keep pushing towards that more equitable future.
This is DigitView.